How much is a person worth when someone decides to measure them? Sit with that image for a moment. A single, crumpled $10 bill, placed down the way you'd slide money to a valet, the way you'd tip a stranger who carried your bag without being asked. Not the amount, the $10, but the manner of it, the deliberate, unhurried disrespect of it. There are people in this world who have learned, sometimes through pain and sometimes through shame, how to make their faces completely unreadable. This is a survival skill. It is not coldness, it is protection. Sometimes humiliation doesn't break you, it introduces you to yourself. There is a moment in every person's life, quiet, devastating, and revelatory, where someone shows them exactly how they have been seen all along. Not how they hoped to be seen, not how they presented themselves, but how they were categorized, cataloged, shelved. That moment is either the end of something or the absolute beginning. Her name is Nia Carter, 27 years old, a waitress at Maison Bleu, a restaurant that doesn't quite know what it's trying to be, upscale in its decor but modest in its wages, the kind of establishment that asks you to present yourself with elegance and pays you as though dignity is complimentary. She is also a nursing student, or rather, she was. She paused her final year to move back home. Her mother had been diagnosed with early-onset heart failure, and the mathematics of that situation were not complicated. Nia had two choices: stay in school, finish her degree, and watch her mother navigate a broken healthcare system alone, or come home, take on extra shifts, and be present. She counts her tips after every shift the way someone counts pills in a prescription, carefully, without performance, making each one matter. On a good night, she walks out with $80, maybe $90. On a slow Tuesday, $40. $40 for 8 hours of carrying other people's needs on a tray. She is not bitter about this, or rather, she refuses to be. There is a difference. Because here is the thing about Nia Carter that you need to understand before anything else can make sense. She has a flaw, and her flaw is beautiful and painful in equal measure. She confuses independence with emotional isolation. She has built a wall so thorough, so architecturally sound, that people mistake it for confidence. Her coworkers see a woman who doesn't need help. Her mother sees a daughter who carries too much. And the men who've tried to date her in the past, they see a woman who holds herself so carefully that getting close feels like an intrusion. She refuses help, not because she doesn't want it, but because she is terrified of what comes after it. Because in her experience, help has always come with a cost, a condition, a quiet condescension that follows you out the door and lingers in the parking lot. She refuses vulnerability, not because she is hard, but because she once allowed someone to see her softness, and they used it like a compass to find the fastest route to her insecurities. She refuses to be pitied. Most of all that, because pity is the ugliest currency ever invented. That was all. Just 7 words, delivered with the casualness of someone commenting on the weather. The speaker didn't even lower her voice, because why would she? Nia wasn't meant to matter enough to overhear. But she did. And those words went into her like a splinter, small enough to ignore most days, but pressing whenever she got close to something that felt like joy, whenever she allowed herself to imagine more. Girls like her don't marry up, they serve. She carried that sentence from 14 to 27. She carried it through every job, every classroom, every first date that ended in disappointment. She didn't carry it consciously, that would have been too easy. She carried it the way people carry inherited beliefs, deep in the muscle, below the level of thought, showing up only when the weight of the moment pressed against exactly the right nerve. Which is why, when Marcus asked her to dinner, she said yes. Not because she was in love with him, not because she was swept away. She said yes because she was tired. She was tired of shrinking herself to fit into the narrow space she'd been assigned. She was tired of going home to an empty apartment and a nursing textbook and a mother who was getting smaller by the month. She wanted one evening that felt like something more than survival. She put on her best dress, a deep burgundy wrap that made her look like she belonged somewhere expensive. She spent 45 minutes on her hair. She told herself she wasn't doing it for him. She was doing it for herself. And that was true, mostly. She didn't know she was walking directly into a reenactment of her deepest fear. Stay with her, because what happens next is not just a bad date. It is a collision between a woman's carefully built armor and the one thing she never saw coming. Marcus Williams was not a villain. That's what makes this hard. That's what makes it real. He was a project manager for a mid-sized logistics company. He drove a BMW he was still 2 years into paying off. He wore designer cologne and checked his phone the way some men check their reflection. Too often, always slightly dissatisfied with what they find. He wasn't evil. He was something more insidious. He was insecure and performative, a man who needed an audience for his own self-esteem, who talked loudly not because he had important things to say, but because silence made him feel small. He started well enough. He talked about his work, his ambitions, his apartment on the East Side. He dropped the names of restaurants he'd been to, not asking if she'd been, simply assuming she hadn't. He mentioned his last relationship with the practiced casualness of someone bringing it up on purpose. My last girl was a lawyer, corporate, downtown office, the whole thing. We just wanted different things, you know? Nia nodded. She was listening, not with warmth, but with the professional attention she gave to difficult customers at work. She was watching him the way you watch a dish that doesn't smell quite right, giving it the benefit of the doubt, not yet sure. So what about you? You plan to stay here forever? Like waitressing? The word waitressing left his mouth like he'd touched something that stained. Not angry, just faintly revolted. Nia met her eyes, level, calm. Inside, the splinter pressed. I'm finishing my nursing degree. I paused for family reasons. Oh, that's impressive. You're actually really articulate, you know that? Like, I wasn't expecting that. Articulate. The word landed the way it always does, dressed up as a compliment, hiding a judgment underneath its coat. You're really articulate. Translation, you speak better than I expected someone like you to speak. She smiled, small, controlled. Inside, the splinter pressed. He kept going. You don't act like most girls from this side of town. That's a compliment, by the way. Of course it was. They always are. Nia's hands, which had been resting on the table, moved slowly to her lap. That was the only tell, the only signal that something inside her was reorganizing itself, tucking things away, preparing. He talked about high-value women, about what he looked for in a partner. He used the phrase brings to the table 3 times in 15 minutes, always in reference to women, never to himself. He talked about dating as though it were an investment strategy, assessing risk, calculating return, managing portfolio. And then came the moment of the bill. The waiter, Nia's colleague, a young man who made brief, apologetic eye contact with her, placed the check between them. It was a simple gesture, neutral, the universe making no statement either way. Marcus looked at it, then he looked at her. He reached into his wallet. He produced a $10 bill. He placed it on the table with the deliberate lightness of a man who has rehearsed this. That covers your half. Not the comfortable kind, the kind that has weight, the kind that settles into your chest cavity and makes your next breath harder than it should be. Her entree had cost $22, her glass of sparkling water, $4. The total, about $63. And he was offering 10, not as carelessness, but as a statement. And then, quietly, barely above the ambient noise of the room, I don't invest where there's no long-term return. Not the $10, not the split bill, not even the contempt barely hidden under the surface of his voice. It was that phrase, clinical, boardroom cold, applied to a human being sitting across from him in her best dress. She was not a person in that moment. She was a portfolio entry that hadn't impressed him enough to risk. Her throat tightened. Old wound, fully activated. Girls like her don't marry up. They serve. She did not cry. She did not raise her voice. She did not give him the satisfaction of watching her unravel. She simply looked at the $10 bill on the table as though it were a document she was reading very carefully, as though she was making sure she understood every word of what was being said to her. And then she looked up. Not Marcus, not yet, but the man at the next table, who had been sitting quietly, alone, with a glass of burgundy and a closed notebook, who had been still and present in the way of someone who was listening to something the room couldn't hear, who was watching her now with an expression she couldn't immediately name. It wasn't pity. It was something older, something that recognized. She didn't know who he was. She didn't know what he was about to do. But something in the air shifted, the way air shifts before weather changes. And everything that came next would be determined by one quiet, deliberate act. Don't go anywhere, because what happens in the next few minutes will change two lives. And the question of how and why is more complicated than you think. His name is Adrian Vale. Early 40s, not flashy. The kind of wealth you wouldn't recognize if you sat across from him on a train. No ostentatious watch, no cufflinks catching the light, no way of entering a room that announces itself. He had the quiet confidence of a man who had proven things to himself a long time ago and no longer needed to perform the proof. Publicly, founder of Vale Health Partners, a healthcare investment group that had channeled over $200 million into under-resourced communities over the past decade. Board positions, industry awards, a name people in certain rooms spoke with a particular kind of respect. He was divorced 3 years prior. Amicably, he told people, which meant the anger had exhausted itself before the paperwork. No children, an apartment in the financial district that was beautiful and silent, a weekend house on the coast that he visited less and less because being alone in a beautiful place starts to feel like irony. He hid behind success, not maliciously, not with full awareness of it. He had simply learned that achievement was the cleanest way to avoid emotional risk. If you were building something, you were busy. If you were busy, you couldn't be asked to be present. And if you weren't present, nothing could get to you. Adrian Vale was 23 years old. He was a busboy here. He wore the white jacket and cleared the tables of people who looked through him the way you look through a window. It was a job. It paid the bills while he took business classes at night. He was not ashamed of it then. He did not have the luxury of shame. He only had the utility of necessity. One evening, a Friday, busy, full house, a wealthy customer sitting at table 7, irritated about something irrelevant, turned and tossed a handful of coins in his direction. Filthy servant. 2 words, plus scattered coins on the floor that Adrian bent down to pick up because he needed every cent. He remembered the sound of that man's table laughing, not cruelly, just carelessly, as if what had just happened was a minor distraction from their appetizers. He built an empire to never feel that small again. He acquired companies. He was photographed at galas. He was profiled in business magazines under headlines that used words like visionary and disruptor. He put himself in rooms where the coins were now his to toss, though he never did. He made himself into someone that no one would dare look through again. But he never healed the wound, because you cannot close a wound by building something on top of it. All you do is raise the structure higher, and the wound stays there, under the foundation, quiet, occasionally leaking. And now he was sitting in this restaurant. He came here sometimes. He wasn't sure why. Some circuit of memory that brought him back. And across the room was a woman in a burgundy dress being slowly, quietly dismantled by a man with a $10 bill and a vocabulary of contempt. He watched her hold herself steady. He watched the micro-expressions she couldn't entirely suppress. He watched her throat move when she swallowed what she was feeling. And something inside him cracked open. Not in a romantic way, not immediately. In a recognition way, in the way a scar responds to cold, an old ache in new weather. He saw his 23-year-old self, bent over the floor, picking up coins. He didn't move immediately. He sat with his hand around his wine glass, and he asked himself a question that was harder than it looked. Was he reacting because of her or because of him? Was the impulse to stand up coming from empathy or a 20-year-old trauma wearing empathy's face? He stayed still for almost 3 full minutes. That's a long time when someone is being humiliated across a room from you. 3 minutes of internal argument. 3 minutes of examining his own motives the way a surgeon examines a wound before deciding how to approach it. He was triggered, and she deserved better. Those two things could both be true, and acting on the second didn't require the first to be resolved. He walked to their table. He did not look at Marcus. He only looked at Nia. "Excuse me." His voice was low, present, the kind of voice that makes a room slightly quieter around it. "You deserve better than a negotiation." He placed a business card on the table. Not money, a card, clean and white, with just his name and a number. Then he walked back to his table, left a folded bill on the cloth, and left the restaurant. Marcus stared at the card, then at the door, then at Nia. Nia did not look at either man. She looked at the card. She read the name. She placed it carefully in her clutch, as if she hadn't decided yet whether to keep it. Why didn't he defend her publicly? Why didn't he call Marcus out, loudly, in front of everyone? What did he know about humiliation that the rest of us have forgotten? Keep listening, because that question, why he held back, is the most important thing about who Adrian Vale actually is. Nia walked out of Maison Bleu at 9:47 p.m. The autumn air hit her like a second opinion. She was not grateful. Let's be absolutely clear about that, because the story is cheap if we skip over this part. She was furious. Not at Marcus. Well, yes, at Marcus, but it's something bigger than Marcus. At the entire architecture of the evening. At the fact that she had needed saving at all. At the fact that a stranger's intervention was what ended the humiliation, rather than her own power to end it. At the feel of being watched. By Marcus, who measured her, and by Adrian, who witnessed her. She had been seen by two men in two completely different ways, and somehow both made her feel exposed. She felt pitied, rescued, exposed. The card sat in her clutch like a splinter. She thought about dropping it. She almost did, at the corner of 5th and Madison, near the storm drain. Her fingers touched it. Ready. But curiosity is stubborn. It does not respond to pride the way it should. It stays when everything else in you is trying to leave. She kept it. 3 days later, not that night, not the next morning, but 3 days later, she Googled him. Adrian Vale, founder of Vale Health Partners, a healthcare investment group focused on under-resourced communities. He funded nursing programs, 5 of them, in 4 different cities, providing full sponsorship for students who would pause their education for financial or family reasons. She read that last line twice. Students who would pause their education for financial or family reasons. She put the phone face down on the kitchen table and sat in the silence of her apartment for a long time. Her mother was asleep in the next room. The refrigerator hummed. Outside, the city continued its indifferent proceedings. Coincidence? She didn't believe in coincidences, but she also didn't believe in fairy tales. So what was this? She called the number on the card. Not to ask him out, not to thank him. She called because she had questions, and she was a woman who did not like unanswered questions. They met for coffee 2 weeks later. A neutral place, public. She arrived first, which was intentional. She needed to be established in the space before he entered it. Their first conversation was not warm. It was not cold either. It was precise. The way 2 sharp objects can be close to each other without either one cutting. I want to be clear about something. I don't need saving. She said it the way people say things they've been rehearsing. Direct, clean, looking him in the eye. He looked at her with the evenness of a man who had been expecting this. Good. I don't save people. Silence. A different kind from the restaurant. This one wasn't uncomfortable. It was assessing. They talked for 2 hours, about everything and nothing that was supposed to be the point of the meeting. They argued about class mobility, whether it was real, whether it was earned, or whether it was granted to some people and denied to others by mechanisms so structural they were nearly invisible. They argued about emotional walls. He said at one point that some people built walls and called them standards. She replied that some people bought properties and called it intimacy. He laughed, a real one, surprised out of him. They argued about what success costs. He said it costs more than people advertise. She said she wasn't afraid of cost. He looked at her steadily and said, "I know, that's what concerns me." She didn't know what to do with that, so she tucked it away, the way she tucked away most things that hit too close. There was chemistry. Of course there was. But it was restrained, not by lack of feeling, but by the intelligence of both people, by the awareness that rushing something structural was how you got cracks in the foundation. She left the coffee meeting without resolution, without plans, but with something she hadn't expected. The beginning of a thought that maybe not all intervention was condescension, that maybe not all witnessing was judgment. But before anything could develop, before any of this could become what it might want to become, the world intervened, and it came for exactly the thing she had dared to want. Adrian's foundation, the Vail Community Health Initiative, ran an annual competitive sponsorship for nursing students who had interrupted their studies for documented hardship. The award covered full tuition, housing allowance, and a mentorship program for the final 2 years of clinical training. It was not charity. It was competitive. Over 300 applicants per cycle, an independent review board, blind scoring on academic record, community involvement, and a written statement. Nia applied. She applied without telling him, without asking for anything. She submitted her application at 11:30 p.m. on a Tuesday night, hunched over her laptop at the kitchen table, her mother's medications lined up on the counter like a small, silent audience. She did not tell Adrian. She did not reach out to him after the application. She was applying on her own merits, or not at all. 3 weeks later, the whispers started. One of the foundation's administrative staff had mentioned, casually at a dinner, that the founder had been seen having coffee with a waitress, that the same waitress had applied for the sponsorship shortly after. The implication was not stated. It didn't need to be. Implication is efficient like that. It travels faster than facts and leaves less evidence. The review board heard the rumor. 2 of its members requested clarification. Someone reached out to Nia indirectly, not officially, just a note through a mutual contact that questions had been raised about the integrity of her application. She heard it on a Thursday afternoon. She was in the break room at the restaurant. She read the message twice. She put her phone in her pocket. She went back out on the floor and finished her shift. Every order correct, every customer attended to, her face composed and professional, and she cried in the parking lot afterward, alone, in her car, with the radio off. Not because she was defeated, because she was exhausted, because she had done everything right and it still wasn't clean enough, because the world kept finding ways to put a question mark next to her. She considered withdrawing, seriously considered it. She drafted the withdrawal email twice. The logic was this: if she withdrew, she protected her dignity. She refused to let her reputation be decided by speculation. She walked away clean, even if it cost her the opportunity. The counter-argument was this: if she withdrew, she let them win. She allowed the rumor to function as a verdict. She punished herself for a story someone else was telling. He heard about it anyway. Someone on the board mentioned it to him as a formality, informing him that questions had been raised and that the founder might want to distance himself from the situation. Adrian's response was quiet, deliberate. He recused himself from any involvement in the review cycle. He provided documentation that the process was blind and competitive. He submitted no letter, made no call, pulled no strings. That restraint, that absence of rescue, was, paradoxically, the most profound thing he could have offered her. Because what Nia needed more than anything was not to be protected. She needed to be trusted to protect herself. She did not withdraw. And what the review board found when they looked at Nia Carter's application without his name anywhere near it was something they could not argue with. The letter arrived on a Monday morning. She was getting ready for a double shift. She opened it standing at her kitchen counter, still in her work uniform, her coffee going cold beside her. She read it. She read it again. She put it down. She picked it up. She read it a third time. Then she walked to her mother's room. She sat on the edge of the bed. She handed the letter across without speaking. Her mother read it. Her mother looked up. And then they held each other in the specific silence of people for whom joy has always arrived carefully, with its coat on, ready to leave, and who were learning, slowly, to let it stay. Nia Carter won the Vail Foundation sponsorship on merit, blind review, independent board, her academic records, her written statement about her mother, her nursing school transcript with a GPA that had not dropped a single point even while she was working 8-hour shifts, all of it reviewed by people who did not know her name or her story until the scores were already in. The next 2 years were the hardest and fullest of her life. She went back to school, she kept her apartment, she cut her shifts to part-time, and she brought her A into her clinical rotations with the particular focus of someone who has wanted this for too long to be careless with it. She did not contact Adrian during this time. She was not ready. She was still building herself, finishing the construction of the person she'd been interrupted from becoming, and she needed to complete that without the weight of someone else's presence, however quiet, however respectful. He did not contact her. He understood, perhaps instinctively, that this was the correct posture. She walked across the stage in May. She received her degree. She smiled the smile of someone who has paid for something in a currency more real than money. Her mother was in the third row. She looked small in the auditorium seat, but she was looking at her daughter the way people look at evidence that they were worth fighting for. That evening, Nia took her mother out for dinner, a real dinner. Not Maison Blanc, somewhere else, somewhere new. But at the last minute, standing outside the car, she changed her mind. She knew where she needed to go. She reserved a table, table 12, not the same table as before, but close enough. She sat with her mother. She ordered exactly what she wanted. She drank wine. She laughed. And then she looked across the room. Again, alone, the same spot, a glass of burgundy, a notebook closed this time, as if he had been waiting not for her specifically, but for the conclusion of something that had started here. Their eyes met. She said something to her mother. Her mother glanced across the room and said nothing, just nodded once, in the way of women who have survived enough to know when to let something be. Nia stood. She smoothed her dress. She walked to his table. Not rescued, not small, not seeking validation. Equal. She sat down across from him without waiting to be invited. He moved to make room for her as though he had been expecting this, and perhaps in some way he had been. She reached into her bag. She produced carefully the $10 bill from that night. It had been in her wallet for 2 years, not because she treasured the humiliation, but because she had promised herself she would choose what this became. She placed it on the table between them. This was never about money. He looked at the bill. He looked at her. No, it was about knowing your worth. They looked at each other in the full weight of what that meant. Two people who had been told, one loudly with scattered coins, one quietly with a crumpled bill, that their worth was subject to someone else's verdict. Two people who spent years proving that verdict wrong. Two people sitting now on the far side of their becoming. And then, for the first time, they allowed vulnerability. He talked about the coins on the floor, about the white jacket and the Friday night and the sound of that table laughing. He talked about it with the directness of someone who has finally decided the wound gets more power from being hidden than from being named. She talked about the sentence she carried from 14, about the 7 words that lived in her bones, about how she'd let herself be smaller than she needed to be,
how she'd kept herself out of vulnerability's reach not from strength, but from the fear of being confirmed in her worst fear about herself. They sat in the restaurant until closing. The candles burned low. The staff, her former colleagues, moved around them with the practiced invisibility of people who know when not to interrupt something important. No savior, no princess. Two healed people, not fully healed, not perfectly, but consciously, actively healing, choosing each other. He would face scrutiny again publicly this time. The business press would find the story interesting. Founder of a foundation that awarded a scholarship to a woman he was now in a relationship with, however the timeline arranged itself in summary. It would require documentation, transparency, patient explanation. He didn't hide from it. He sat with it. He let the facts be what they were, in the order they occurred, and he trusted that people who were paying attention would understand. She would face the residue of old fears, not erased by achievement, just quieted. There would be mornings when she would lie in the new silence of something good.
And feel the old alarm go off. This doesn't last for girls like you. She would have to choose on those mornings not to obey it. Some days that choice would be easy. Some days it would be the hardest thing she did. They chose anyway. Both of them, with full knowledge of the cost. The night she was valued at $10 was the night she stopped negotiating her worth. Not because of him, not because of the foundation, or the scholarship, or the card left quietly on a table in a restaurant by a man who knew what it felt like to be small, but because she picked up the $10 bill instead of leaving it, because she kept it, because she decided what it meant instead of letting it mean what Marcus intended. The narrative of our lives is written by everyone around us, constantly, without our permission. The extraordinary act is to read what they've written, and then revise. Not as humiliation, as reminder. Know your worth, and then refuse to negotiate. If this story moved you, if some part of it lives in your chest the way Nia carried those 7 words, share it with someone who needs to hear it. Because the world is full of people sitting across from their $10 bill, deciding what to do next, and they need to know it's not the amount, it's what you choose it to mean.